twice as much as Coca Cola for the same price.
I ain't got no home, I'm just a roaming round. Just a wandering worker, I go from town to town. And the police make it hard wherever I may go. And I ain't got no home in this world anymore.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
The war was now on. During the 30s, Coke sent its undercover agents, called soda spooks, on a series of raids to discover if Pepsi was being served to customers who had ordered the real thing.
My brothers and my sisters are stranded on this road, a hot and dusty road that 1,000,000 feet have trod. Rich man took my home and drove me from my door, and I ain't got no home in this world anymore.
In 1939, Coke sued Pepsi in Canada over the use of the word cola, and lost. Coke appealed to the Privy Council. "That was one hell of a dirty trick," said Pepsi's president, who hired as their lawyer the presidential candidate, Wendell Willkie, and had him flown to England in an Air Force bomber. And Pepsi won, but only because, it was whispered, Britain did not want to strain its wartime ties with the Empire. This was the world's first singing commercial. Introduced by Pepsi in 1939, it became one of the best-known tunes in America.
Nickel, nickel, to-do-la-da-da, nickel, nickel, to-do-la-da-da, Pepsi Cola hits the spot, 12 full ounces, that's a lot, twice as much, just a nickel, too. Pepsi Cola is a drink for you. Nickel, 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 Pepsi Cola is a drink for you.
When World War II began for America at Pearl Harbor, Coca-Cola was ready, and a love letter from one GI to his wife became famous. "Well, honey," wrote the soldier, "I guess you want to know now what it is I want so much outside of you. Well, darling, it's a bottle of Coca-Cola." The response was immediate. "When an American soldier wants a Coke," said a company vice president, "it reminds him of what he's fighting for." So Coca-Cola went to war and never looked back.
World War II was the complete stimulus for the displacement of the product throughout the world. We had been working on it very assiduously up to the war. In the 30s, as a matter of fact, the Coca-Cola Export Corporation was organized in 1930. And we'd gone into England, we had gone into Germany, into France, into Spain, and Italy a little bit, but not much. But the war was the perfect vehicle. Mr. Woodruff wanted to see that every GI had a bottle of Coke wherever he was in the world, whether he could pay for it or not.
For all its patriotism, Coca-Cola was sold over there in Hitler's Germany. Shortly after the war began, the German Office of Enemy Propaganda appointed Coca-Cola's man in Berlin, Max Keith, head of soft drink production for all of occupied Europe. They gave him a fleet of trucks and petrol, and the Coca-Cola company was in business behind enemy lines, and the profits grew. When it became difficult to get Coca-Cola syrup, Keith concocted a drink called Fanta, short for fantastic. In 1945, Max Keith was duly liberated by the US Marines, and Fanta went on to become a worldwide Coca-Cola product.
The
Coca Cola Company presents The Pause That Refreshes on the Air.
It was a symbol of home, love, family, love, the fireside, and all that, the baseball game. And the boys really got homesick. And they thought of the corner drugstore and the walking home with the bottles and so forth, and the going out on Saturday night to the public place where they could watch the girls go by, or to date the girls. And if they were broke, they always had plenty of nickels for Coke. You know, a Coke date was quite the thing back in those days. But that's what they thought about while they were out there, bored to death. You know, this idea of hurry up and wait in the Army. And they were waiting for action, and they were bored, and they thought of home and Coke, and that was why they really got sentimental about it. I mean, I've heard stories about some of the guys getting a little bit teary about it. They didn't get all emotionally upset about a loaf of bread or a pound of butter. It was a matter of association of the shape of the bottle or the shape of the glass at the drugstore. Why, I can get right sentimental about it myself because I met my wife at a drugstore over a Coca Cola. And that was even before I went with Coca Cola.
The GIs could dry their tears, for Coca-Cola was on the way. In a masterstroke of public relations, the company offered to send bottling plants to the front line. And this was not only accepted, but was paid for by the War Department. Coca-Cola couldn't believe its luck. Coke was made a wartime priority item, and the Army Chief of Staff cabled theater commanders that they could order entire Coca-Cola bottling plants to be shipped direct to the front. Dispensers were installed in tanks, submarines, even fighter planes. To run it all, Coca-Cola dispatched men who were known as the Coca-Cola Colonels. The non-essential had become the indispensable. The effect of this was to associate the small green bottle with the mystique of American prosperity. Coca-Cola became a symbol of expectation, and this meant a ready-made, worldwide, multi-million-dollar market. Any other company might have been accused of war profiteering, but the Coca-Cola Company came home a hero. The battlefield was now the political Cold War. In communist Poland, Coca-Cola was attacked as a nest of American espionage. However, paradox intruded when the Polish temperance movement declared, "The most imperialistic Coca-Cola is preferable to the ideologically pure vodka."
Coca-Cola, nothing like a Coke.
I am not and never have been a communist. I am not and never have been a fellow traveler.
Meanwhile, Pepsi-Cola had joined up with that seeker of reds under America's beds, Senator Joe McCarthy, whose politics interested the company less than his seat on the Senate Sugar Committee. McCarthy called sugar rationing anti-American and became known as the Pepsi-Cola Kid. And for this, he collected a $20,000 check from a Pepsi lobbyist. When questioned about the payoff, McCarthy said, "Listen, I don't answer charges, I make them." By the 1950s, Pepsi had a new chairman, Al Steele. Steele was married to the movie star Joan Crawford, who embraced her extra wifely duties with much enthusiasm. Steele understood post-war consumer America, as John Scully, a former president of Pepsi-Cola America, explains.
Now, what was going on in America at that time? Remember, we had what we call the baby bubble. These are the young people who were born shortly after the Second World War when the GIs returned. They were moving into their teens into the 1960s. Teenagers are a very high per capita consumption group for soft drinks. We also had a growing affluent middle class America. And Coke had been around for a long, long time. It was a symbol of what America was. We decided we wanted Pepsi to be a symbol of what America was becoming. And therefore, we developed this idea of the Pepsi generation. We said that if there is a large group of affluent middle-class people developing, And if there are a large number of younger people who are going to be emerging as a driving force in the soft drink industry, how do we position ourselves as the product that articulates for them the aspirations of this growing middle class? Because most of our Americans at that time were gaining affluence, but they didn't have much experience in how to spend this money. And if you look at our commercials back in the early 1960s with the Pepsi generation, you'll see dirt bikes and dune buggies and all kinds of different activities, many of which are commonplace in this country today. But only 20 years ago, they were still relatively new.